Welcome to Be On It, episode 17.
Hey, Jessica, what's going on in the beehive today?
Hi, Debbie. I was thinking about what is ego? Webster's dictionary online defines ego as a person's sense of self or self importance. I wanted to know more about it, so I went on to wikimedia.org where it talks about who Sigmund Freud was. He was an Austrian neurologist and founder of psychoanalysis. And he created a book that was translated after he had passed called The Ego and the Id, where he talks about the id, which is a person's most basic and impulsive instinct, the one that feeds into our deepest desires and physical needs.
Okay, so you're saying it is basically raw emotions. I'm trying to frame it into an analogy too, Jessica, because I really want to get these things cemented in my brain. So when I think of a production line in manufacturing, I'm thinking that it is the raw materials. Would you agree?
I totally agree.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's an awesome analogy. And then Freud goes on to say the superego is the opposite of the id. The superego is a component controlled by our highest morals and standards, operating through our conscience and making us desire to be our most ideal selves.
Okay. So then if it are the raw emotions, then what I'm hearing you say, superego is very much like a moral compass. And so to me, if we're thinking about manufacturing on a production line, to me, superego feels like it's the quality control.
Exactly.
So then what are we missing? What's that third component?
So the third component is the ego, and the ego mediates between the id and realities of the world around us while being supervised and guilted by the superego.
So ego, from what you're saying, it plays a very crucial role for us as people. We got to kind of take away perceptions that we have about ego in an objective way. If you think about a production line in manufacturing, you have the id that are the raw materials. The ego is making the product, bringing in reality, bringing in perspectives of reality. So ego plays a humongous part in this manufacturing process. And then, as we just mentioned, superego is the QC, the quality control.
Exactly. I just found this to be so fascinating and complex. So I just took a deep dive and started reading more. If you guys want to know more about that particular concept, I found a really good YouTube video by Dr. Kushner where he talks about Sigmund Freud's id, ego, and superego, I personality structure. Check it out. It gives like a 16-minute video of and breaks it down with great examples. I liked it. I thought it was helpful to in better understanding something that's so complex.
Agree.
And so, in doing that deep dive, I came across a really interesting article from BelieveInMind.com. Saju Pradeepa talks about Sigmund Freud, the ego being the practical manager. And Freud goes on to say the ego is the mental system that plans, evaluates consequences, delays impulses, and chooses actions that make sense in context. And Sanja Pradeepa uses an example. She goes, at 2 a.m., your id says, eat the cake. Your superego says, no, you're trying to be healthy. The ego negotiates, maybe a small piece now and skip dessert tomorrow. She goes on to say that negotiation balancing desires, morality, and reality is what Freud meant by ego's job. And then, according to this article, modern psychology says ego not just as pride or arrogance, but as the entire structure of selfhood. And I thought that was really interesting. It was the whole concept versus the self importance, just being focused on that. Freud never meant it to be in a negative connotation. He meant it to be helpful, like we're all important.
Mm-hmm.
Self is important in order to grow. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the article goes on to say self concept, the picture of who we are, self narrative, the story that makes our life meaningful, developmental, how the ego grows and changes with age, positive, how ego supports self-esteem and well-being. Cognitive, how ego rises and falls with belonging. And here's where it gets really interesting. Cross-cultural, how is ego shaped by culture and community? Neuroscience, how ego is connected to the brain. And Freud talks about how ego floats between consciousness and subconsciousness. I thought that was so helpful and informative because what I always thought ego was, and for me, I didn't think it was that deep. I always kind of felt like it was this feeling that I'd get where um I felt confident, or I got a little too overly confident or cocky and I needed to be a little bit more humble. And I learned that it's way more complex than that.
It's like three parts with ego playing a humongous role. What comes out or what we see in other people is a fusion of the three, basically.
Right. They all work together to create the
Mhm.
whole.
I do see though ego and superego playing a humongous part in how we as people are in community and in society. Because if we just played into our impulsive selves, there would be chaos.
Exactly. You're born with a moral compass. Some are a little stronger than others, and hence why we do see sometimes people have chaos in their lives. Or they're doing things for instant gratification that have a consequence. So it's really interesting. I was trying to think of how does ego apply to me and how has it evolved over time for me personally. And I was thinking about for me, when someone corrects me on a word, it really hurts my ego. Because when I think back about why that is it goes back to childhood where I didn't feel smart enough. And as an adult, and this is still a work in progress for me, it shows up on how I look, dress, or present myself to the world. I felt like I had to look a certain way in order not to come off as poor because superego says poor is bad. And so I would dress a certain way and carry myself a certain way in order to look not poor. And over time, who cares? This
Yeah.
is who I am. I've learned, like, for example, I would wear uncomfortable shoes when I was younger, and just because they looked cute and they matched. And over time, I decided comfort is better. So that is how my ego's evolved. I've dropped the I have to look cute to
Mhm.
I have to be comfortable and practical.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, it's still a struggle, but it's
Yeah.
always, but I'm definitely more confident in who I am. And I was also thinking about Freud when you look at psychoanalysis and his point of view, how we subconsciously repress negative things. And I would call it holding it in a mental file box as an adult to be dealt with later. And through maturing and evolving, I have learned to open those file boxes and start to unpack some of those things that were holding me back. I've really just become more confident and free. Everybody's going to have a different rate in which they heal some of these traumas, and it never goes away. It's always a part of you, but it helps you to be more confident in life.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting too when I think about, I don't know why I keep going back to ego again, but just the maturation process that takes place with your ego. And I have to totally reframe ego in my mind because I know I might have been taught it back in a psychology course back in college, but for some reason it just ego always has a negative connotation in my mind because it's used that way in culture. Like it's ego is negative. You don't want to have an ego. But the reality is we all have an ego.
Right.
We all have one. So it's not negative to have an ego. So I gotta reframe my mind about ego and to understand that when ego does come off as more arrogant or anything like that, that's obviously maybe the way that person is perceiving themselves. And when we look at the spectrum of time and life, is that one part of the maturation process of a person, period. Like
Right.
maybe when we're at a certain age and have these certain circumstances, we might have a very arrogant sense of self. But as we live life, as we learn, as we grow, that sense of self is going to most likely change over time, over a person's lifespan.
We are human and we are a product of our communities, right? And in our upbringing and what our culture is. And so as you age and mature, your personality changes, your maturity levels change, your understanding of life and human nature changes. And so it has to evolve. It just makes sense for it to evolve.
Mhm.
And you kind of, and I feel like as you get older, you have a better understanding of yourself and your ego. Like you understand the bigger picture of what all of that means for you. And I think you become more comfortable with the positives and the negatives and the attributes of yourself. And you just, this is who I am. And I'm always working on being the best version of myself. Or, not everybody, but for those that want to be learners and growers, you are working on your best self in order to bring the whole best version of you out there to the world.
And yeah, and to go along with what you're saying, when one is very self-aware and they have had some psychology courses, have some knowledge about psychology, they can acknowledge all of the things that are going on in their mind. Who doesn't have raw emotions about a lot of things in life? Like you said, you were putting those emotions into folders and then you had to bring them out again and deal with them. So we we should acknowledge that it is there, and maybe when we address what's going on in our id, we can, in a more constructive way, let them lie and be as they are instead of them becoming a prominent force in our lives. And we have to continually repress them.
Exactly. You have to reach a point in your life where you address your stuff that's weighing on you. And going back to what id, ego, and superego is, here is another simple analogy. Think of how 2-year-olds are. They want it now, right? I want a cookie. I want it right now. And the ego, it's more realistic and tells the id, be quiet, calm down. Here's how we're going to get it. And then we have the super ego. It's the conscience, right? That tries to tell it and ego, you can't have that.
What about like when we're thinking of, for instance, like road rage? Is that just that's our id coming through, and our ego and our super ego aren't doing much to control that?
Well, I think that that is super ego working with the instant gratification of I want it now. I want you to get out of my way now because society says I have to be at this place on time. If I don't get there on time, if, for instance, you're late for work, I'm going to be fired. So there's this pressure, which the super ego is a part of morals, guilt tripping you, and then your instant gratification of now, 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 I think plays a part of road rage. Because your ego will be like, now, now, calm down. It's not everybody's fault that I didn't have good time management skills and that I am getting on the road a little bit later. Calm down before someone gets hurt. Like they're
Right.
the mediator is a perfect example. Like they're the mediator. They're the one that looks at both sides and goes, okay, you're feeling this way because of this. And yes, you want it now, but you can't have it now because it's not safe to get all angry and be driving all crazy. You're going to hurt somebody.
Then my next question is then just go like, so it's super important to identify these concepts because they exist in our mind. Um,
Right.
so what do we do with this after we learn that yes, we all have an id, we all have an ego, and also a super ego? What do we do with all this knowledge in practical terms, like day to day?
What you get from it is that you want to be self aware of these things. Why am I doing this? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I have to right now? Who's making me feel like I have to do this right now? You don't Oh, anybody, anything. If you don't deal with all these thoughts and feelings and things that you've repressed, it's going to come out in other negative ways, whether it be your health, whether it be your personality, whatever you present to the world, or, looking at the bigger picture of what society says. And is that reasonable? Is just because society says this, if you don't question things, you'll just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then I feel like that this happens a lot with kids that have become young adults. Well, my mom and dad, they always did it this way, and I've got to keep doing it this way. Or they did X, Y, and Z, and I must do X, Y, and Z. Well, no, you're a free thinker. What is right for you? That's how they raised you. If you liked the way that makes you feel good, if it makes you feel some sort of way, then continue by all means. But if it doesn't and you're questioning it, look at the big picture and think about why that's making you feel a certain way. And either if it's in a negative way, do something differently, is the way I like to look at it.
So, like in the process of introspection,
Mm-hmm.
and also as a way of processing our actions, our behaviors, our routines, our practices.
Everybody's super ego based on their individuality and their upbringing is going to look different.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, we're just all unique and different. And I just think that somebody might fixate on one thing that, the superego says, and that's their moral compass. Whereas, as we know, people don't, they ignore them, they suppress the moral compass and they do things that are what we would deem as not very moral.
And then there's also the other extreme where some people aren't very self-aware at all,
Right.
and none of this introspection happens.
No, not at all. And yeah, they never change. They never have that
So
growth.
so they're just going by learned behaviors, basically.
Learned behaviors, and they're not correcting
Hmm.
those negative behaviors.
Hmm.
It's so fascinating. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. It's so, yeah, it's an interesting thing that, was discovered about human nature. And we constantly are learning, and it's funny because I think about it in healthcare too, like
Yeah.
how we went from end of life care to palliative care. It's really about the whole system. So when I think about it in healthcare terms and like the whole thing, because I always thought, everybody's like hospice felt so permanent, and really hospice for some people can be a year or longer, and it's not always 6 months or less. And so I always thought it was kind of odd that we didn't look at the whole picture. Now we look at palliative care and the whole system, and individualize our care based off of that, which is really moving us forward as a society in that aspect.
And just, I think it just does kind of help to justify how problems aren't cut and dry and simple in life. Uh, we're human beings are really complex.
Yeah,
We're very organic, complex species, and so it just helps for me to understand that's why problems are complex and solutions can be complex too, and not one size fits all
right.
when it comes to problems and problem solving and troubleshooting. And one size fits all kind of that generalization can be applied to a lot of different aspects of life.
I agree. This was such a good topic. I feel like if you guys really enjoyed talking about this, join us next time for our next interesting topic that we want to discuss.
And don't forget to leave us a review.
Bye.
Bye. We are all about community. Join our community by following and subscribing to Be On It through YouTube, Instagram, and of course your podcasting platform, so we can continue to bring Be On It to you.